everyone, my name is Abhishek Jain and welcome back to the tutorial series on how to implement a SQLITE3 database with the Python programming language. Before continuing with this video, I would highly recommend you to watch my previous video because in today's video I'm just gonna cover detail on what happens when we try to delete the records from the parent table for which we already have so many dependent child tables, and we have achieved that we have achieved the relationship between the parent and the child with a concept called in a relational database is a referential integrity, right? So let's quickly see what we had covered in the previous video and what we have coded and how we have achieved the referential integrity. So in the previous part, we have built, the relationship between stock and a stock price, where stock was acting as a parent table and a stock price was a child table for the stock, and how the relationship is built between these two tables with the help of a stock ID. And when we just try to insert this record with the stock ID 4, which is not yet present, then we were facing this constraint error, right? This is what we had covered in the previous video, right? So now, so what does it mean? It means that, this is a default behavior. We cannot have a record into the child table for the stock ID which is not yet present in the parent table, right? This is good, right? But sometimes what happens in a real time, we have to delete a record from the parent table, and there might be a possibility you have a multiple dependent tables which is dependent upon the records which you have in a parent table. So what would happen in that situation? So now we just see the default behavior of SQLITE3. What happens if I want to delete a record from the parent table? So for that I have to just write a small delete query from the parent table, and I can just copy this part and I can just delete from stock. Okay, so now if I want to execute this, I have to just comment this out because I don't want to execute the insert statement anymore. I just want to execute this query which is deleting the record from the stock, which is my parent, right? So let's see what happens if I just run it. Oh, see, it's not allowing me to do that and it's saying that it's a foreign key constraint failed, right? Let's see what happens if I just want to delete the record from the stock. See, I'm able to delete it, right? And now if I just go back and just try to delete, let's see what happens. See, now I'm able to do it. So it means that if I want to delete a record from the parent table, we have to first remove all the dependent records from the child table, and then it would allow me to delete from the parent table. But this, in my case, it's very simple because we have one-to-one relationship between one table, right? But if just think about the real-time situation where you have thousands or hundreds of tables and you have millions or thousands of records in those tables, then how you will find out the relationship between the tables, right? And that's very next to impossible, right? So what happens is, there is a way through which we can control this delete, right? So basically, and before understanding, how many options we have, how through which we can control this phenomena, we have to understand what's the default behavior. So basically the default behavior is you cannot delete a record from the parent table until or unless you have a single record, dependent single record into the child table, right? So that is how this is being achieved with the relational database. So there is an attribute called on delete, and we have on update as well, right? So we have on delete and on update through which we can either delete the record or we can update the value of a dependent parent table. And then we have actions defined for these two things, right? So we have on delete action and we have on update action, right? So now what all values we can have for the action? So by default, for any relational database, you will find this is the behavior, right? So restrict means on delete restrict. It means that this is a by default. If you are not mentioning anything, as we haven't used this on delete and on update in my child creation table query, so that means it is just following this on delete restrict and on delete on update restrict, and that's the reason we are not able to delete it. And update part we are going to cover in our next part, right? So now we have restrict. Now if I want to delete it, I don't want to go for this manual process where first I have to delete all the independent record and then I want to delete from the parent. So now you have to think, I mean, how your application is going to be used, and based on that you can decide how you want to frame your create query. So now what all other actions we have for the actions? So for actions can be, the first one we have already seen, which is restrict, which is the default one. Then we have cascade, which you will see most of the time you will be using. Then we have set null. Then we have set default. Then we have no action. Right. So no action is pretty much same like a restrict one. So restrict we have already seen that it's not allow. It will not allow us to make the delete operation on the parent table. But cascade, what does the cascade do? What the cascade does? Cascade means if you are going to delete a record from the parent table, it will search for all the child table which has a dependency on this on the record which you are deleting from the parent. It's going to delete from the all the child table. So you don't have to manually delete them to allow that delete operation happens. How can we achieve that? So to achieve that, we have to just mention on delete, and we have to just mention cascade, right? So let's see what happens, right? So now what I'm going to do is let me just comment this delete operation first. Let me just create the table again one more time. So what I'm going to do is let me just delete the database, right? So I'm just going to delete this. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this. So what would happen? Oh, I have to just put this one because 4 is not there. Okay, so now we have one record. Okay, so if I want to delete it, this time it will allow us to delete. And now we have one record. Let's see, we have one record in my parent table, one record in my child table. Now what I'm doing is I'm just trying to delete the record from the parents without first deleting the child table records, right? Let's see, now we are able to do. That is how the cascade works. In a similar fashion, what I can do is I can just put set null. Right? So to see the behavior of this, let me just uncomment this part. Okay, and let me just comment the delete part. Let me just remove this database completely. Right, and if I just run this query, I can see I have one record in parent, one record in child, and let me just uncomment the delete one, and I'm just commenting the insert one. Let me just run this query one more time. Now my parent record has been deleted without even worried about deleting the records, and now in place of that one, now I can see the set null, which is none is basically a representation of null in the Python programming language. When it comes to the database terminology, then we call it as a null, right? So now that is how the set null and the cascade actually works, right? Similarly, restrict is by default. You can put a restrict, then we will see the same behavior through which we have started. We will see this foreign key constraint issue, and we have to delete first the records from all the dependent table, then only it will allow us to. Then we have set default. Set default means when you are just creating your table, whatever the default value you are providing, that is going to be considered. And no action is pretty much same like the restrict one, right? So this is what, but it's very rarely that you will be seeing all those in action. So most of the time you will see restrict, cascade, and set null, set default. Set default you may use, but I haven't seen so many occurrences where we have to use. Most of the time either you have to do a restrict or cascade. But you can just play around with all these things, and you can just look for some documentation online, because there are a lot of good documentation which you can refer to make your understanding on these points, right? So that's it from my side for this particular video. If you have any feedback, any suggestion, or if you feel like that I can improve the quality of my videos by adding some more content and making my explanation more simpler, please feel free to put that into the comment section, and I will be more than happy to implement that in my future videos. So thanks for watching this, and as always, stay healthy and keep learning.